BBC One. First, later than billed. David Dimbleby leads the debate.
Tonight we're in Taunton in Somerset, and welcome to Question Time. Welcome to you watching at home, to our audience here, to our panel, of course. Our panel tonight, Labour's Shadow Education Secretary, Tristram Hunt, Caroline Lucas, the one Green MP and former leader of her party, the Conservative Owen Paterson, who, when sacked as Environment Secretary this summer, said he was proud that the Greens gloated over his dismissal, the Liberal Democrat Transport Minister Susan Kramer, and the novelist and screenwriter Anthony Horowitz. And if you want to get stuck into this debate by text or Twitter, our hashtags, you probably know, BBCQT, and you can follow us at BBC Question Time. You can text us 83981 and use the red button to see what others are saying. Our first question tonight is from Juan Herrera, please.
Isn't it time for the government to review the current drugs policy after a Home Office report suggested no link between the strict law and the level of illegal use?
This is the report that analysed what was going on and was published today about drugs, showing that there was no correlation between strict law and the level of illegal usage. Caroline Lucas, you had a motion in the House of Commons about this, didn't you, today?
I did. There was a debate this afternoon, and it went through. And the motion, basically, in front of Parliament was asking the government to do a review of our own Misuse of Drugs Act, which was basically a piece of law put in place back in 1971. It's never been reviewed since then, and yet we get lots of evidence that it's not doing the job of protecting people to the best extent possible. So I very much welcome this report from the Home Office. It's been held up for quite some time. I think there was some fights within government as to what exactly it was going to say. But I think that finding, this key finding, that there isn't a correlation between the level of punitiveness and people's propensity to take drugs, really does give us an open door to be able to look again at whether or not our current drug system is protecting people.
Just looking again, do you actually want to repeal the law on various drugs or all drugs, saying there shouldn't be a criminal offence to own them, possess them, or trade in them?
I want an evidence-based approach, a step-by-step approach, looking at the evidence. I think, from the evidence that I've looked at, that, for example, the decriminalisation of the personal use of drugs would be a good place to start. I think that the evidence from Portugal, for example, suggests that that was very successful. It's led to a halving of people dying from heroin. It's led to a reduction of people taking heroin. It's led to more people going into treatment. Yeah. I think it's really important that addiction is treated as a health issue rather than as a criminal one. I really worry that many young people are ending up with criminal records simply for the possession when they haven't done anything worse than that. So I think we need to be realistic. It's clear that prohibition isn't deterring people from experimenting with drugs. If we want to have a starting point, as I think we do, which is about reducing the harms associated with experimenting with drugs, then it seems to me that we need to have that kind of evidence-based approach.
Owen Paterson, this is the line, no apparent correlation between the toughness of a country's approach and the prevalence of adult drug use. Does that persuade you, this document, that the law should change?
I'm not sure that's a totally accurate summary of the document.
I'm just reading it from the document.
I've not read the whole document.
There I have the advantage over you.
You do. But I've seen quotes to say that Portugal brought in a whole range of other measures, health treatments, education, at the same time as they changed the legal status. And the report is clear. It is not absolutely clear which element of the Portuguese policy made the difference. I think what I'd like to say is our policy has reduced drug use over the last 10 years. We're down from 12.2% down to 8.8%.
Of what?
And
of what?
12% adults from over 16. Adults from over 16 to 65 using drugs, and I think there is no clear, simple solution. So I totally understand, because Caroline's been very eloquent about this, and she has very clear and strongly held beliefs, and has a very difficult problem, I know, in Brighton. But I've also had serious drugs of a bizarre nature. There's a horrible thing made from paint stripper, which was a particularly unique problem in Oswestry. where the West Mercia police were tremendous, and they closed down the producers of that particular product, which is a good example of prohibition really working. And so if I could just finish.
But was that, was that a legal high, or was that an illegal drug that they were producing?
Well, that's a very good point. It was a legal product. We can all go and buy a paint stripper every day of the week, but it was being converted into something lethal. So my point is, our policy at the moment has reduced drug use by about a third over the last 10 years.
That really isn't true.
Hang on, just let me finish.
All right.
And it is a mixture of enforcement, and it's not a question of putting everyone in prison. Only 3% of those who were caught with possession end up in prison. What is critical are the other programmes. So we've got 200,000 people on rehabilitation programmes, and bringing in something like the National Crime Agency has also begun to reduce the drug supply.
Let's just hear Caroline wants to just contradict the facts. Let's just hear that. And I'll come to you who asked the question.
I mean, Owen Paterson says that drug use has come down, but that actually masks a lot of subtlety behind that overall figure. Cannabis use has come down, and that's been coming down for a great many years, irrespective of what particular class it's in, whether it's Class B, Class C, or anything else. The other use of drugs, the use of other drugs, has remained stable. The number of people who died last year as a result of heroin overdose has actually increased by 32%. So I think there's no cause to be complacent. What I think we do need to worry about is the fact that there isn't enough money going into things like the National Treatment Centre. That is being cut at exactly the same time as crime is costing us £14 billion as a result of drugs. It costs the NHS £500 million. This isn't a good use of money, particularly at a time of austerity. You would have thought that this would be a government who would like to know what's happening to all of the money it's spending on a drugs policy. If the evidence is that that drugs policy isn't working, then I think we should look at it again.
No.
Would not the decriminalisation of drugs allow the government some form of quality control to ensure that this kind of thing, heroin overdoses, etc., doesn't happen because the drugs would be an acceptable standard and at least they would be dispensed by somebody other than a criminal, which would actually avoid a lot of people getting involved in the criminal justice system in the first place?
Tristram Hunt, do you like to pick up that point?
I don't agree with the decriminalisation point. I welcome this report. I think it's a really substantial and significant piece of work. Like Caroline, I want evidence-based policy making, and if what we look at today focuses on the health-based approach rather than the custodial approach, well, that's a really significant piece of research. But I'd say two things. First of all, we have to think very carefully about this language of legalisation and decriminalisation, particularly in terms of cannabis, because what is on the streets today in terms of the intensity and power of some of the cannabis out there and how it leads to psychotic episodes, mental health incidents, is a really, really damaging and dangerous situation. And it's a long way from the sort of world of the Camberwell carrot and Withnail and I and a sort of rather gentle view of what these drugs were about. Actually, these are really dangerous drugs, and if the report leads us in that direction, that worries me. Secondly, on the custodial issue, the real problem in terms of the sending people to prison is then what happens to them in prison. And the amount of drugs in prison is terrifying, and people are coming out with even greater habits out of prison and not dealing with it effectively. So this is an interesting piece of work. I think Caroline's right. We then begin to reflect on it. I would also say what we did in government under the last Labour government was also to look at the treatment side of it and really invest in that side of it, and that has been stripped away in the last few years.
The woman in green there, up there.
I have a question for Mr. Paterson. How is it? I'm not going to quibble about prosecuting people who deal illegally, but how is it a conservative position for the government to get involved in what my personal decisions about what I possess may or may not be if I'm not involving anybody else in it? Isn't that? Would the government tell me how many glasses of wine I could have?
You mean?
Yeah.
But these are dangerous drugs which can kill people.
But alcohol is dangerous.
It is as simple as that.
Alcohol kills people.
Picking up Caroline's point,
Did you catch what she said? Alcohol is dangerous, she said.
Yes, dangerous and alcohol
OK, we'll
kills
pick up
people.
on that. And if you look at what's happened on alcohol, where we've seen a 63% drop in the price in alcohol over the last 10 or so, 15 years, you have seen a significant increase in alcohol. So I think you have to be also aware, and Tristram makes a very good point about the strength of cannabis these days. You also have to be aware, and this is where I listen very carefully to the Centre of Social Justice, who've done a huge amount of work in our most disadvantaged communities. There are those who might be wealthy and live in London and can take recreational drugs, and they have the incomes and the strength and the family background to handle it. What you need to remember, and this is a really horrible fact, is that mortality in the North East is twice as high from drugs as it is in London. So there is also a qualitative difference between those who are taking drugs. So I think it's dangerous. You need a mix. You need what we're doing now, that is law enforcement, but it's really important to remember only 3% of possessors actually go to jail. You then need crime prevention, which is the National Crime Agency, and pick up Tristram's point. We've got 200,000 people on rehab, and it's a mix. And if you look, I think, at what these other countries have done, we all need to read this report. It's a bit hard coming here this evening, not having read the whole thing, but having seen extracts from it, it looks to me, actually, as if all countries are doing a mix. So Portugal isn't just decriminalisation.
Why?
They were miles behind us. They brought in rehab schemes and education, and it's a mixture.
OK, I'll bring in some more people, but just before we move on, why do you think it's all right or safer for middle-class, well-off people to use the same drugs that you say it's dangerous for people to use?
I make a factual statement. They've got the money, they've got the support, and they've got the background to handle the problems that drugs give. And it's a brutal fact.
I think
you look at the Centre for Social Justice work. They've done a huge amount of work on this.
But
and you've got to be very, very careful when you glibly talk about decriminalisation from a nice, big, fat London studio, where we've heard all this talk coming out of the BBC today with just one headline. Just mind what you wish for when you go to some of our more deprived communities where they don't have the strength and resilience.
Kramer.
Well, I was just going to say, Owen, there's I've seen people whose lives are destroyed by drugs, were any social class, any kind of background, and it destroys their families. Absolutely. It destroys their families as well. And can I just say, I was so relieved when this report came out that we're finally following the evidence rather than going with ideology or with what we think is a good PR sell, because it's a scourge we've got to deal with. And surely, if we now know that whether you have, having tough criminal laws doesn't make any difference. You could have low drug use, high drug use. It's not the factor that changes things. Surely we could focus our policing resources on going after the Mr. Bigs, the drug traffickers, and then where we have an individual user, making sure there is treatment available, making sure that people who maybe are not yet addicted but just using actually get to learn about the harm that will happen to them if they follow down that course. And surely this is our opportunity to change course and make sure that we deal effectively with drugs before it takes down more people in all of our communities.
Just remind us of the Liberal Democrat stance on this. Is it to decriminalise cannabis?
It's actually very much in line with this report. We have no time for, the big drug traffickers. You can put them in prison, as far as I'm concerned, pretty much throw away the key. But we have to look at this as a health problem, and that's where our policy goes. It's a health issue.
You haven't answered my question. Do you want to decriminalise possession of cannabis, possession of heroin?
I don't want to decriminalise the traffickers. I do want to have a situation in that narrower sense where if you were found possessing for your own use, you are directed towards genuine treatment and genuine support to get you to the point that
and you aren't imprisoned.
You end up going into the criminal justice system at the moment, and what we have seen is that doesn't get us anywhere. Let's choose a route where we've got a chance of getting a good outcome.
Anthony, I'll come to you in a second. Let me go to the person up there in the back, the woman there.
I was going to ask the panel, what do you think of legal highs? Because I think Taunton at the moment has got a really big problem. We've got 2 shops opened, and from everyone that I know, as I'm in that age group of 16 to 18s, I've actually had more dangers from legal highs than I have from illegal highs.
I thought this was a really important part of the report as well, that we need to get a grip of this. I mean, Ireland has looked at it, and we in the UK need to follow that, because I think you're right, that the proliferation of those legal highs and the very ambiguous grey area surrounding that, and almost the acceptability of some of it, which is producing, as Owen said, some really devastating consequences. So that has to be part of the debate now as well.
Anthony Horowitz.
Well, it seems to be that this subject comes up on Question Time every now and then, every couple of years. They debate about it, they talk about it, they all agree that something should be done, and then they forget about it. And it also seems that this report which has come out You don't like it in the Conservative Party. The government doesn't like the report, so they wish they'd never commissioned it, which makes you wonder why they did. You're not listening to it.
There's a reason why they commissioned it.
Well, yes, I know, but what I'm trying to say is that as soon as it gets into the political arena, the facts, which are very good, and I'm glad that they have come out, seem suddenly just to become something else to slug between them while the drug war continues and continues to be lost. And I really don't know what you were on, Owen, when you came up with some of those statistics you were coming up with. Drug use in this country has not declined to that extent. I was looking at government figures this morning. As you said, Caroline, it's remained about constant. I think there's perhaps a 1 or 2% difference. And I'll tell you something else. You talk about 3% of people being in prison for using drugs, but the truth is I do a certain amount of work in the youth offending system, and I would say that 70% of young people, and I think that is the official figure, are in prison because of drug-related offences. And that's the point. It costs £20,000 a year to maintain a habit on drugs, which means you have to steal £60,000 worth of stuff in order to pay off your offence and have enough money to pay for your habit, which leads to a huge explosion in crime and a vast cost to the country. It's absolutely clear that we have to not necessarily decriminalise it, and I understand the fear of that. As a children's author myself, it would worry me. But it is absolutely clear that we must start treating people who are on drugs as victims and as patients and as people who need help, not punishment. It is the only way forward.
And take a point from the man up there at the back.
Yeah, as an ex-user of drugs and alcohol, I'd like the point made that we need to see this from a health point of view. I think we need to forget about the issue of whether we make it legal to possess small amounts of drugs. That's kind of by the by. I think the main focus here needs to be on readily, quick, effective treatment if people want it. When I cleaned up from the day that I wanted help, it took me 6 months to get into rehab. You know, in those 6 months, because of the drugs that I used, it probably could have killed me. You know, I'm kind of lucky that I'm here. But when I say effective treatment, I don't just mean a detox for a week here and then back home. You know, I mean good, effective, you know, detox, first stage, second stage, third stage, you know, really kind of focusing, you know, on the person. I'd also like to say that a lot of the policy around methadone and substitute drugs given by the GPs are really not the answer. You know, total, you know, for me, being on 100 milligrams of methadone did not make me clean and did not suddenly make me, you know, fine.
But the 6 months did?
No.
The rehab did?
This has been an ongoing process.
Right.
This is 10 years down the line, and I still work at it. I still attend groups. I still speak to people. You know, this isn't something that you're going to cure in a week or in sort of 6 months.
So that's,
you know, this is something that I will continue to work for till I die. Okay. You know,
and that's where we need to put the funds
suffer.
exactly into those kinds of programmes that you're describing, that do have ambition for people on those programmes, that have commitment to them over time. That's expensive, but it's money well spent, because that way you get people properly supported in the community and able to live their lives again.
Well, you agree with that? Thank you. Thank you for that. We'll go on to another question. Mervyn Baker, please. Mervyn Baker.
What are the consequences if we do not repay the £1.7 billion from the EU demand?
The extra £1.7 billion that the European Union Commission is demanding, what are the consequences if we don't pay it? Susan Kramer, what are the consequences if we don't pay it?
Well, I can't
David Cameron says he's not going to, and you're a member of the coalition government, so presumably you support him on this.
That I don't see us paying it. I mean, I really don't think you can come on a matter of weeks' notice and turn up to a country and tell them they need to pay £1.7 billion. I mean, excuse me, you just don't do that. It's a massive sum. I think, well, I mean, the original agreement was was signed by Labour, but I think even then they anticipated this might be slight, adjustments that's of a fairly modest kind, not a massive amount of money like this. And I think we will go back. So we will, look at this. First of all, there are a lot of flaws in the numbers anyway, but you just simply, the principle, you cannot turn round to a country and say, pay us 1.7 billion. It's a huge part of a flexible part of our budget. So I think this is a no-go. And the feeling, I think, is pretty solid that we'll probably discuss this matter, and it will be something that we'll probably still be discussing 5 or 6 years from now. But many other countries, when faced with demands from the European Union, as good Europeans, have turned round and said, no, it's not right, and it's our turn to say, no, it's not right.
So you mean... You mean they've just got the sums wrong? Is that what you mean?
There's probably a strong element of getting the sums wrong, but it's also the principle of the thing. This is meant to be a marginal adjustment. If anybody thinks £1.7 billion is marginal, let me show you how we can use that money in our domestic economy. This is not a trivial amount. So something that is meant essentially as an adjustment, I'm sure we'd have accepted that and said, yes, a little bit up, a little bit down. That's the way that it goes. But this is completely unacceptable, and I honestly don't think any country out there seriously thinks that we're going to pay it. The European Union hasn't even budgeted on the assumption that we are going to pay it, for goodness sake. So let's be sensible about this, I think.
So they've got it wrong, Tristram Hunt, have they?
Well, the question is, what is the consequence? And the consequence will be nothing if we don't pay on December the 1st, and we shouldn't pay on December the 1st. But we need to step back from this.
Sorry, does December the 1st mean we pay on the 2nd of December or the 3rd of December?
No.
Or just don't pay ever?
Absolutely not. We need to step back from this and see how we got to this totally catastrophic situation, which is a massive failure of statesmanship, a massive failure of diplomacy, a massive failure of leadership on behalf of David Cameron and the Tory government. These sums were coming down the line at Her Majesty's government. Treasury officials knew about them. Foreign Office officials knew about them. And the notion that suddenly you turn up for dinner on Friday night and on your plate is a bill for £1.7 billion is totally crazy. And what this points to is the inevitable consequence of David Cameron's lack of leadership in Europe. That he has no allies, he has no support. His rhetoric and language as he runs scared from UKIP is increasingly scared of Europe, and there isn't that strength of leadership of Britain in Europe being able to appeal to allies, sort out these problems and come out of it. Now, I'm a passionate pro-European. I believe our future lies in Europe, and that's why I'm very depressed by the chaos surrounding this, because those of us who are pro-Europeans feel that the Commission haven't behaved particularly well, but feel that our government has spectacularly let us down. And that's what's so depressing about the whole event.
As I understand it, this payment is because of a technical readjustment of Britain's wealth, if you like.
As you understand it.
Well, that's what they say, isn't it?
Well,
is that how you understand it? Or do you think they just...
Well, we need to get to grips with it. I don't think any of us understand how they've come up with it.
But you criticise the Prime Minister for what exactly? Not
I
having said this is rubbish, we won't pay anyway, whatever.
No, I criticise the Prime Minister and the Chancellor and the Foreign Secretary for not being on top of their briefs, for not having the officials tell them that this is coming, for not asking the questions. They knew that this was in the structure, and if you're beginning to have those conversations a few months earlier about readjusting certain levels of wealth and growth, well, then this inevitably has consequences for how much you have to pay into the pot. They should have been across it, and they were asleep at the wheel.
You sat there.
Yes, I'm very surprised as well. As taxpayers, we're expected to calculate exactly what taxes we owe each year, yet the Treasury seemed to be half asleep on working out exactly how much money. We would have thought with a formula that's clearly in place, you could work these things out. Wasn't it only a few weeks ago there were £5.5 billion miscalculation on the amount of taxes that we were going to get in this year?
Yeah. Okay, and you sat up there in the middle.
Tristram, a very good point there, but my understanding is that this predates the present government by several years. It goes back to 2002, 2003. Yeah. Your government.
No, the structures have been set in place for a long period of time. Absolutely right. So the officials knew about the structures. It's up to ministers, who we pay out of our taxes, to be across their jobs. So if this was in the system, they had to know this bill was coming down the line, and if they weren't across it, well, you know, they weren't doing their jobs.
All right, and you said to the left in the yellow shirt, and then I'll come to you. Yes.
Your leader, your Labour Party leader of the opposition, and your shadow chancellor should also be aware of this and should have flagged this up well before anybody else did. Why sit there and wait for somebody else to get dumped on and then turn around and say, we told you so?
We hopefully will be aware of all this on May the 8th next year, when we get access to the official papers and we get access to what's going on in government. We don't have access to those official figures. We don't have access to the papers in Europe about what was explaining this. So this for the opposition, we only knew when the media knew. But the government, crucially, the people who are meant to look after our interests in Europe, who are meant to look after our taxes, who are meant to lead for us in Europe, knew about it and didn't do a thing about it.
So, Tristram, I don't accept many of the Conservatives' positions on Europe.
Well, you're in government with them, Baroness Kramer. I mean, you know...
But wait, this goes back to 2002. Now, Liam Byrne left us a message saying there is no more money. It's a pity he didn't add the fact that we had another bill coming from the European Union.
It is your job. You've been in government for 4.5 years. It is your job. You're paid to do a job for the British people, and you need to wake up and do it.
Owen Paterson, who do you agree with here?
The Labour Party. I admire Tristram's nerve. Let's just remember who the two architects were of the disaster that befell this country. The Labour Party inherited the most successful economy in Western Europe, and Blair and Brown trashed it. When we came in, this country was borrowing £300,000 a minute.
What's this got to do with the question?
Where are we?
And
This is like an old record.
Part of that was that Blair, in return for a reform of the CAP, gave away a big lump of the rebate. And there was no reform of the CAP because I was involved in the negotiations.
Well,
we never got a proper reform, and Blair gave it away.
But why are you going to...
Let me finish. So what we have done, we have picked up the mess left by you lot. We have reduced taxes such as corporation tax, 28, going to be 20%. The private sector in this country has been amazing. We've created 2 million jobs.
Are you getting to the question?
Yeah, I am. I'm just
Can you remember what the question is?
I am just explaining that this is still a job half done. And when you see the talk coming from Tristram, you cannot let this country fall back in the hands of the Labour Party.
But hang on.
It is completely...
You're making very straight political points.
Out of the question.
What are the questions?
The European Union,
right,
1.7 billion.
Thank you for coming. What will happen if it's not
There will be a row.
Yes.
There will be a row. The European Union is constantly in flux. It is a political organisation. There will be a row and there will be an interesting discussion. And I trust David Cameron to get a good result.
OK. Anthony Horowitz.
I'm not really enjoying this very much. I mean, Tricia, I didn't understand you, really. I mean, the timing of this is obviously rather horrible, and it's very strange that nobody seems to have known about it.
Very strange.
And you construe from this it's all David Cameron's fault. But as I understand it, the reason we're being asked to pay this £1.7 billion is because our economy is so successful. And isn't that sort of thanks to David Cameron and George Osborne? That was a question.
Was that a question? Oh, right. I thought it was a rhetorical question. No, the economy is doing well because of hard-working business people and entrepreneurs and wealth creators. Actually, it would be growing even faster and further if George Osborne and David Cameron hadn't, pulled the rug out of the growth in 2011. But the point about a growing economy is to be welcomed and successful. And there are variations in how much we should pay, but not £1.7 billion.
Right. May I just come back, David? May I just come back and say that I think the point of this is that people are broadly fed up with this sort of ping-pong with every single issue. But you took it and you just whacked it across. It's more serious than that, you know?
What's your view, Anthony, about the issue, about the 1.7 billion?
Well, it seems very odd to me. I mean, all these people who suddenly approach... What is puzzling is that they seem to be involving themselves in British politics in a very, almost a sinister way. Are they working for UKIP? What is it they want? it's just before we have a major election coming up, this thing suddenly appears. We have Barroso, we have Merkel, we have the Prime Minister. You're wrong in saying about them saying that nobody's saying we don't have to pay. The Prime Minister of Denmark has already said, you have to pay. They're going to make us pay. But why now? Why has it happened? What is it that they seem to want from our political system? Why are they interfering? I have to be honest with you. Every time this argument comes up, I feel a little bit less well-disposed towards Europe. For the first time since this came up, I begin to wonder, do we really need to be with them?
OK, the one then.
Could one of the panel please answer what are the consequences rather than whose fault it is?
Well done. All right. That was Mervyn Baker's question. Caroline Lucas, what are the consequences?
Well, I think one of the consequences will be that David Cameron's possibilities of getting any kind of reform agenda through the EU are going to be severely compromised if he doesn't actually pay this up. I agree, it's a huge amount of money. It seems to have come from nowhere. It's got a very short amount of time before we have to pay it. I think we should be negotiating about the timing of the amount of money, the actual amount. I think there are some really odd things here about the fact that Greece is going to have to pay more and Germany is going to have to pay less. I mean, the last time I looked at Greece, it wasn't exactly an economic powerhouse. So there are some strange calculations going on here. But I agree with Anthony in the sense that you do wonder about that UKIP sleeper cell in Brussels. And, you know, Nigel Farage must think that Christmas has come early. You know, he's absolutely talking about the Commission as this vampire that is sucking the blood out of British taxpayers. And that's all very serious because I really worry when someone like Anthony concludes from this that maybe we're better off out of the EU. I am confident that we are not better out of the EU, but I do understand that when you have such a technocratic decision that's taken in a way that seems to be completely oblivious of the political realities, it does make you wonder who is running Brussels. But we must not go down the route of then thinking that we don't need the EU. We massively do. And this amount of money, 1.7 billion, it's a lot of money, but if you put it in the context, CBI saying we get about 70 billion net worth out of membership of the EU, put it into context, it's not so much. And so in that case, I think we absolutely need to be making a strong case for the EU, but I would accept that this sort of bill doesn't make our job any easier.
Okay. I'll take a couple more points. You, sir. Just a quick comment, if you would, because I want to get on to another question then.
Yes, isn't this a good enough reason to get out of Europe once and for all?
No. Is that, in your view? It is. Thumbs up for that.
Absolutely out.
OK, and you, sir, up there.
Sorry, just quickly. If we're prepared to say no, and we believe there's no consequences in this case, would it not be pertinent to do that more often? Taking Anthony's viewpoint, if we stand up and actually say we don't agree, I think we should be part of Europe, but there's plenty of things we should disagree about, and actually say we're not going along with that. I haven't seen any repercussions in the past.
Well, my point is... And one last point from the lid there. Yes.
Do you think that anti-EU feeling could actually strengthen the cause for the Conservatives, given that they're the only party offering a referendum were they to win the next government?
That if they refused... What do you think, Owen Paterson? What about UKIP? They're going to get some of the advantage, aren't they?
No, only the Conservatives are going to give you a referendum. If the gentleman there in the grey jumper thinks he wants a referendum...
He's shaking his head. He doesn't believe you.
I would like to pick up the point of the gentleman behind. You talked about taxpayers.
Go deal with this man who's shaking his head at you.
Give us a referendum. A referendum on what?
The Conservative Party gets a majority in the next election, you'll get a referendum.
On what? What will be the question? You can't give
whether,
a referendum
whether
on
you
in
accept
or out.
the renegotiated settlement or whether you want to leave. Can I just pick up the person at the back? Sorry, the gentleman on taxpayer. All this money comes from taxpayers. And Anthony's absolutely right. We're being penalised for having a successful economy. Monsieur Hollande, who has trashed the French economy, pursuing policies favoured by the Labour Party, a ridiculous punitive 75% wealth tax, driven 500,000 hard-working Frenchmen to go and live in London, he is going to get a rebate. It is absolutely, totally unacceptable.
All right.
Well, look, can I make one point? Because I think this is really crucial. That's, I think we have to be in the European Union for the future of our children. But whatever way you make the decision, you don't make it on the basis of a snit. So this is much too fundamental and much too important for all of our lives. And I just think we need to make sure. I don't think we're going to pay this. It'll blow over. It'll be all sorted. But regardless of that, 1.7 billion is tiny compared to the future of my kids and grandchildren and yours.
And you said that.
The taxpayer there.
You said that.
I totally agree, Owen, with what you said about the taxpayers. My point is that perhaps the Treasury should be given an abacus so they can work out their figures correctly.
All right, let's move on that point. Thank you very much. Judith Jocham-Harris, please. Judith Jocham-Harris.
Should we introduce an amnesty for jihadist fighters, or should they be tried for treason, as suggested by the Foreign Secretary?
The Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond, said that it could be that they had committed treason by... Owen Paterson, do you think people returning should be tried for treason, or how should they be treated? Jihadist fighters.
Well, I think this is a very interesting question, considering how we treated these sort of people in our past history. We expect people who brought up in this country, are educated on the back of taxpayers who worked hard to provide those taxes, to be loyal. If they then choose to go and make themselves loyal to an alien entity, and ISIL is a very alien new entity, which is wholly hostile to us, then they put themselves outside our jurisdiction and they put their status as British citizens at risk.
And if they... Would you encourage them to come back if they decide they want to come back to this country? And if they come back to this country, what action, if any, would you take against them?
That's for them to decide. We should be loyal. We should be loyal to people who are loyal to this country.
So, if they come back to this country, would you have them prosecuted and charged with treason, as Philip Hammond suggested? Is that what you'd like to see happen?
I would like to see their citizenship brought into question and decided by a court. Because I do not think if you go and make yourself loyal to ISIL and you attack law-abiding citizens who are of our allied countries, you do not belong anymore to the British citizenship.
Right. Caroline Lucas.
I think that the guiding principle here has to be about our own security. And it worries me to think that actually if we don't do anything about these people, if we simply close the borders, then what are we doing then? We're leaving them in some kind of limbo where perhaps they're being more likely to fall into the hands of people who want to use them even more to violent ends. So I think what I've heard from talking to people who know young men who've gone out to Syria, for example, there are some young people who've gone out in moments of spontaneity and not thinking things through. They've got there, they've suddenly realised how awful it is, and they want to come back. I'm not suggesting that we simply open the borders and say, do come back in. Of course not. But I do think we could learn from, for example, Denmark, that does have some kind of rehabilitation process whereby it's got to be on a case-by-case basis. There can't be, the same rule for everybody. But if it would mean that we could make sure that that person is not a threat to the British people, which is absolutely priority, but they may well be less of a threat if we had them here, where we could be looking at what they're doing, perhaps also using them to be able to go out to other young people in this country and explain the reality of what it's like out in Syria fighting, and perhaps try and persuade others not to go out. That might be a measure that isn't soft at all. It's actually very pragmatic, and it's saying that we might just be safer if we had these people where we knew where they were and what they were doing, than if they're just simply in a limbo land we know not where.
Okay. What's your view?
Owen, the rhetoric about my nation is ridiculous and outdated. We should judge people on their credit as a good human being and as a good person, rather than their allegiance to a nation.
But if they've been with groups that are beheading people and...
then that necessarily makes them less morally.
It
does. It does. It makes them very,
all right, Tristram.
It makes them exceedingly immoral.
No, I said
they lack the moral status of most decent British
citizens.
citizens.
Necessarily, it makes them less morally. I think we should look at people based on their morals rather than their allegiance to a nation.
And if we look on their morals, if they're fighting with Islamic State, their moral status is very, very low indeed. I think the problem with the notion of the treason is it adds to the glamour of going abroad and fighting. And what is sort of drawing these young men abroad is the drama and the glamour of going out there fighting. And I think this language of treason and this that adds to a sense of crusade and everything that attracts them. I think there is a big difference, though, between and how we have to think about this, between these young men going out there and what they like to think, those who sort of apologise to them, of the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s, and how if you go abroad, actually there's a legitimacy to that and you should be able to come home because you fought on a side. We should be absolutely clear about what Islamic State is and how opposed it is to British interests and British values. And many of their actions are grotesque and they are contrary to our national interest. So they should be prosecuted for crimes which promote terrorism. Because they are involved in actions which will seek to promote terrorism back here in the UK.
All right.
So they absolutely should be prosecuted.
You sit at the back. Anthony, I'll come to you now. Yes, you
rather than blaming the individual themselves, is this whole idea of, Mr. Paterson said, going to fight for an alien identity, is that itself not a symbol of how much the government itself, how foreign policy has alienated so many individuals in the country that they're neglecting their own country and they're going to fight for another organisation? Is that not symbolic of how British foreign policy has completely disenchanted so many?
All right, no, Tristan, let me put it to Anthony Horowitz.
I'd like to try and come to this defence of this young man over here who got into trouble a moment ago over the question of whether they're moral or immoral. I think the word you're looking for is they're very young. These are really, some of these, I mean, the two brothers who were killed were 17 when they left this country. I'm not saying that excuses them, but it should at least in some form colour how we treat them. But it seems to me that the big question is here is not what we do with them when they come back, but how do we stop them from leaving in the first place? That is the question. How are they being so radicalised? And it seems to me that, first of all, although imams in this country are doing, I suppose, the best they can, many imams, I'm told, are really a little bit too old, and also there are language problems with the ones who are here, and the imams who are preaching from abroad are much, much more radical. And these young men, fuelled, I think, largely by testosterone, by a need for identity and a sort of a vision of themselves as Lawrence of Arabia, are being sold a pup. So we need to be educating these young people about what is really going on. We should be using the people who come back as part of that education process to tell them that jihad is not Lawrence of Arabia. And I think that we just need to be a little kinder and calmer in how we treat them, even though they must, of course, our security must come first.
And what do you say, if we can just come back to the point that was made at the back there about this being British government policy that has led these people to act in the way they do against the British government because they disapproved, by implication, of what Britain does?
I don't go on with treason. That sounds like an episode of Fool's War, but unfortunately what you're talking about is terrorism. I mean, if people don't approve of the government and then go abroad to kill as a result of that, they are terrorists, and I'm afraid they do have to be treated that way.
The government can act in a way that is not going to infuriate so many people to this extent. Perhaps they should reconsider...
Yeah, but infuriating doesn't mean allowing people to go away and chop people's heads off. That's
Susan Kramer.
Please first remember that this is a very small number of the young Muslim people that we have in our country, young British Muslims. And I think we have to keep that perspective. Look, I mean, it's clear that some of the people who've gone are basically war criminals, and I think they should be prosecuted as war criminals. But within that group, you are go outside of that group, beyond that group, if you like. You're going to have young people who went, who were utterly naive, who now have totally changed their minds, regretted everything that they've done, and want to find a way back. And it seems to me it has to be a very carefully managed process, because you want to be sure that anyone who comes back doesn't put our security at risk. That's absolutely important. But I also think they are British, and we have to recognise that. So I would find a way back for those we are convinced have remorse, have understood that this was a horrific thing that they've been engaged with. And even better, if they can take that message back into their own communities. Because in the end, this is not going to be the last time that we see violence in the Middle East. And we need to make sure that we begin to build that kind of understanding.
All right. And you in the middle.
Okay. I just want to make a comment about, I know you've been talking about men, but there's also been young girls that have gone out as well. There was recently a young girl from Bristol, where I'm from, who, unbeknown to her parents, just went and got on a plane and ended up in Turkey. And I think there's sort of a, vulnerability about it as well, some of these young... girls.
OK, I'm going to move on because we've got so many questions you've asked tonight. I want to try and see if I can get through 2 before we finish the programme. If we can plead with you to be fairly swift or succinct in your answers. Jack Leeming's question, please, first of all.
The Mayor of Calais seems to want to blame her present ongoing migrant problem on our overgenerous benefits system. Is she right?
She gave evidence this week and said, you come to Britain, you get £36 a week as an asylum seeker, and you get nothing in France, and that's why they're all coming over here, and it's therefore Britain's fault. Anthony Horowitz.
Well, she's right to the extent that £36 a week, which I think is the figure in question, does seem an enormous amount of money to somebody who doesn't know, to somebody who is in a country far away and who believes that that is worth having. She is wrong, however, in blaming us for this problem. It is a worldwide problem, first of all. This is not just our problem. And it goes back, I think, to the first question again. This is a wonderful country to come to. Immigrants from all over the world know that they will be well treated here because of the sort of country we are. That is why they're trying to come here. It is not simply to pick up a little pocket full of benefits.
OK. Susan Kramer, can you keep it as brief as Anthony did? Thank you, Anthony.
Well, first of all, I mean, I find her statement astonishing because actually in France you get nearly double the amount as an asylum seeker. It's over £61 for a single person.
The point is you don't get it straight away.
Well, but you get it very quickly.
Not very quickly, that's her whole point. You don't get it very quickly. You wait, they get the paperwork and they just sit on it for months.
Well, that's one of the things that we see is, in fact, that over twice the number of people that seek asylum seek it in France than do in the UK.
Okay.
So in terms of the benefit being a pull, I mean, that just strikes me almost as
So what was she on
irrelevant.
about?
Well, I think Calais is struggling to take responsibility, frankly, for how it handles what is acceptably a problem. It needs to work much more closely with us in the UK. It needs to take a much more proactive role in all of this. And I do think, frankly, for the Mayor of Calais, she is attempting to some degree to wash her hands of this and just be willing to have this turn into a British problem. And she needs to be a good European and work with us to make sure that it isn't a problem either for France or the UK. And I'm very sad that she isn't taking that attitude.
Okay. Owen Paterson.
Well, to answer the specific question, I don't think they're coming just for the £36. It's picking up the previous question, which I didn't answer. This is a wonderful country to live in. And we should be very proud of being British and having made a successful country to which people are very keen to come because we're successful. What this is a symptom of globalisation. And what we need to do is to ensure there is free trade around, ensure there's prosperity, not have idiotic things like the European Union subsidising fishing boats, destroying livelihoods in Africa on the west and east coast, depriving people of prosperity, so they look to us as a place to come. And that is really important. This is a massive global problem, and this is a symptom. And the £36 is incidental. We've toughened up on the benefits, but we have to recognise, while there's this massive discrepancy, and we're a successful country as we are, and some of our anti-free trade policies are driving people out of jobs in North Africa and West Africa and East Africa, then they will try and come here. Okay. So we want more prosperity and more free trade around the world.
Caroline Lucas.
Well, I don't think they're coming for benefits, and in fact the evidence is that once they get here they actually do want jobs. That's what they're coming for. But actually what they're coming from is desperate situations, and that is something I think we need to look at. The fact they're coming from places like Syria and Iraq and Eritrea. When you read some of the stories of the incredible journeys these people have, the way in which they put their lives at risk, not just on the boats that come over the Mediterranean, but also, before they get to that point, perhaps in Eritrea, for example, in Eritrea, I was reading about them being in prison camps and having to escape from that and then walking 15 days across the Sahara Desert. The idea that our benefit level is going to be the thing that is attracting them, I think, is just cloud cuckoo land. But I do worry deeply that the concern around this is leading to all kinds of really hyperbolic rhetoric and is also leading to what I think is an absolutely terrible decision that's been made this week about Britain pulling its money out of that search and rescue system off Owen Paterson talks about how proud we are to be British and the British record that we have, and I'm proud to be British, but I'm not proud when I see that, because essentially what David Cameron is doing is using people's lives as a political football. We should be proud and help people in distress, not consign them to the seas where we know that they're going to lose their lives. So I think that this decision is utterly undermining the fundamental principles that we want to aspire to in Britain and in the EU.
Caroline, honestly, that is a terrible misrepresentation of what's happened.
Is it?
Yes. The Italian Navy have been working very hard over recent years, picking up many of these boats, which are organised by traffickers. And what has happened, the traffickers are brutally exploiting this. They're putting very vulnerable people out on these boats and then saying, when you get to a certain point, use this mobile phone and the Italian Navy will pick you up. Now, that is a grotesque abuse of what's been going on. There will now be a new scheme which one hopes will use better intelligence, will be more effective. But it is...
Well, the new scheme won't be more effective.
No,
because it's not going nearly so far out.
It is quite wrong to portray it as you did. The traffickers are quite deliberately abusing this and actually putting more people at risk.
This is an example of David Cameron trying to out-UKIP once again, and it is an absolute travesty, I think, of what Britain should be about.
That is most unfair and inaccurate. What you are not doing is recognising the grotesque, brutal cynicism and cruelty of these traffickers.
I agree with you entirely.
That's why we need to work far more. Anthony was touching on it. It's all a symptom of globalisation. We need to be working far more with these countries, encouraging prosperity.
We do.
All right.
But we're trashing the fishing community.
Tristram Hunt.
I agree with you.
Well, throughout this debate, we've confused asylum and immigration, and we shouldn't do that because they're two very different things. And this is the week, actually, when the Czech Republic honoured a really special man in British history, Sir Nicholas Winton, who, 105 years old during World War II, he was the British Schindler. He saved young Jewish kids in Czechoslovakia, sending them back to Britain. And that is the spirit of Britain. That is what we're about. And that's why I share with Caroline a great deal of distress over what's happening in the Mediterranean. But we also have to have really effective borders. We can't have the free movement of benefits across the European Union. We can't have people coming here and then sending benefits back to Poland. That's not how it works. That's not what we signed up to in Europe. I believe in the free movement of labour. That's part of what the European Union is about. We've benefited from here in the UK, Auf Wiedersehen Pep, people going over to Germany during those years, people living in Spain today. But we need some effective border systems, count them in, count them out, make sure there's not abuse of benefits, but we also need to retain our great historic dignity when it comes to providing asylum for those in need.
OK, thank you. We have got time for one last and very pertinent question from Holly Coomber, please. Holly Coomber.
Could we be facing electrical blackouts this winter?
The report that we might be facing electrical blackouts this winter, the Conservative government says no, we won't. Caroline Lucas, what do you think?
Well, it's not just the Conservative government that says that no, we won't, but the National Grid has said very clearly that they don't believe we will either. So I don't think we will. Having said that, I do think there are issues around the amount of capacity that we have in terms of our energy, and I think one of the reasons for that, if you just look at the last couple of weeks, has been about the fact that we've had 4 nuclear reactors actually offline. Now, this will probably be very grieving for Owen Paterson, who likes to say that it's all these nasty renewables that are so intermittent. Actually, nuclear over the past few months and years have been incredibly intermittent, these unexpected outages, which means that nuclear isn't producing. I think what we should be doing...
How intermittent to the wind farms?
Well, I'm just coming to that because... I'm glad you asked me that. Last week was the first time, I think, where we managed to produce more electricity from UK wind farms than all nuclear power stations.
We had a hurricane, and we had 3 nuclear plants down. Of course there was more wind.
3 nuclear plants down. So you should be worrying about that, I should have thought, rather than thinking that building another one at Hinkley Point at massively over the wholesale price of electricity, you're basically going to lock us into 30 years at double the price of wholesale electricity. And so that's going to cost us a huge amount. It's going to be a subsidy, even though this government promised it wouldn't give subsidies to nuclear. It's going to centralise our energy system to just the time when we need decentralised energy.
Why has our capacity fallen and fallen so that we're now threatened with blackouts this winter?
Because we haven't been investing in it.
Because we haven't been investing enough in green...
I would like to see us doing 2 things. The first thing I would like us to be doing is investing in a massive investment in renewable energy. Wind energy, onshore wind, is now coming down in price massively. It's the cheapest one, and it's becoming now competitive with fossil fuels. Right. That is the energy source that Owen Paterson is trying to get rid of. Eric Pickles this week just turn down his 50th wind farm. I think that's absolutely despicable. But at the same time as they're doing that, they are also not pursuing energy efficiency.
OK, I've got to stop you because we've only got the 4 minutes and I don't want you to give more than one of them. No, you've started but you can't finish. Paterson.
Well, I do agree with Caroline. The National Grid says we will not have the lights go out this winter because we've got about 71 gigawatts of capacity and we're probably going to hit 58, 59 at a peak moment. But her talk about renewables is complete fantasy. Very briefly, 1 gigawatt of wind requires 1,500 turbines. So I've just given you the figures, 71, top 50. So if we had 60 gigawatts, we're going to need 90,000 wind turbines. Where on earth are they going to go? And the Climate Change Act, which Caroline believes very strongly in, requires us to decarbonise. That means no petrol, no gas in your houses, no gas boilers. Everything has ultimately got to be non-carbon. That's either nuclear or it's going to be renewable. And then the lights will go out.
Not bad.
All right. Anthony Horowitz.
Well, I think we've just seen the future of energy policy created on this programme. You're absolutely right. Nuclear power stations this year have proven to be intermittent. But wind power is also intermittent when the wind doesn't blow. Solar power is intermittent when the sun doesn't shine.
But you can store it. You can store wind and sun. The nuclear you don't store. That's an important difference.
You can't store electricity, however.
And you increasingly can. Battery technology is coming on so that you can.
Yes, but earlier this year we paid £11 million to the Germans because a wind farm was producing too much electricity and we had to turn it off. But all I'm saying is that in this argument, it should be obvious to anybody that we need all of them. All these things have to work together to form a constant energy policy.
Susan Kramer. Remember, you have 1 minute only.
OK, hearing Anthony was a relief, because I don't agree with either Caroline or Owen. So, look, we will keep the lights on, but we have to tackle climate change. So I think it's absolutely right. We've been building up renewables. It's about 15% of our electricity now. We're also leaders in offshore wind. We're leaders in tidal. But we do need the nuclear plants as well. And I'm a big backer of Hinkley Point. And the office is going to bring on that and the support that it will give to our economy.
OK, well done. Tristram?
Let us end the programme with a discussion of the Stoke-on-Trent ceramics industry. Because while there's been... I don't think
that was the question.
While there's been...
I know you come from Stoke-on-Trent.
But while there are going to be no domestic blackouts, it was unclear whether there would be industrial blackouts. And the real fear is that in an era of really tight energy, it's going to be industry which pays the price this winter. And so the ceramics industry, other highly energy-intensive industries, could have their capacity shut down. So there's a real issue about failure on gas storage, failure on investment, on having the right energy levels. And for our successful steel industry, glass industry, ceramics industry, that's a real source of concern for our competitiveness. I'm a believer in the Climate Change Act. I'm a believer in long-term decarbonisation. But I'm not a believer in, at the same time, stripping out British jobs and British industry from the UK.
One last point from you in the green dress there in the middle.
I would just like to say that nuclear is not the way forward. I don't know if the panel is aware that today, a train, even today, left Hinkley to take nuclear waste up to Sellafield. And if anyone has seen the photos of Sellafield in the press the last few days, with the concrete breaking up, seagulls bathing in the cooling ponds, it's just not the way.
All right, and you, sir, with your hand up in the spectacles, just a brief response, I think, to her, if I judge by you shaking your head.
Surely our problem is the fact that successive governments, Labour and Tory, have not had a cohesive plan to what to do with their power industry. It's got to the stage now where we have to rely on foreign governments to pay for our power stations. Hinkley Point C will be owned by the French and Chinese governments, not our government, and we will have to pay the price for that.
Are you in favour of the new nuclear power
Yes, I am,
station?
because I actually work in Hinkley Point A.
Well, I'm sorry we have to stop, but stop we have to. We're going to be in Middlesbrough next week. I'm not quite sure who we're going to have on the panel next week. We shall see. And the week after that, we're going to be in Cardiff. Now, if you'd like to come to either Middlesbrough or Cardiff, go to our website to apply. The address is there, or 0330 123 9988. You can ring us. If you're listening on Radio 5 Live to this, as you know, the debate continues on Question Time Extra Time. But here, my thanks to our panel and to all of you who came here to take part in this edition of Question Time from Taunton, and until next Thursday, good night.
Tracy Emin talks to Andrew Neil about women, ageing and feminism. This week follows next on BBC One.
At the last election, young people voted for the Lib Dems more than any other group.
Can the party do it again? Free Speech is joined by Nick Clegg to find out.
That's Nick Clegg on his own in this chair, facing your questions.
Tuesday live at 8 o'clock on BBC Three.